Most people over 60 drink coffee every morning without thinking twice about it. But what if one tiny kitchen spice could completely change the way you experience that cup? Over the last few years, nutrition researchers and health experts have been paying closer attention to a surprising combination that many seniors have never heard about. Some people say it helped them feel lighter after meals. Others noticed improvements in their morning routine they weren't expecting. But there's one specific reason this combination has been attracting attention, and most people don't discover it until it's too late. Today, we're going to break down exactly what happens when you add a single clove to your morning coffee, what science actually says, and the one mistake many people over 60 make when trying it. Let me introduce you to someone first, because I think her story is a good place to start. Dorothy is 71 years old, lives just outside Sacramento, and for nearly 40 years, her morning routine never changed. Wake up, let the dog out, start the coffee maker, and drink her first cup standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at her garden. Simple, predictable, comforting. But about a year ago, Dorothy mentioned to her daughter that something about her mornings had started feeling different. Not bad exactly, just different. She'd noticed that her stomach felt a little calmer after that first cup than it used to. She'd noticed her coffee seemed to have a little more depth to it, almost like a warmth she couldn't quite describe. When her daughter asked what changed, Dorothy laughed and said, "I started adding a clove to the pot. I read about it somewhere and figured, why not? That's it. That's the whole story, at least at first. But it's exactly the kind of small, almost forgettable change that ends up mattering more than people expect. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why. So, let's talk about what cloves actually are, because most of us know them from holiday ham or a jar in the back of the spice cabinet, but very few people actually understand what's inside this little dried flower bud. Cloves come from a tropical evergreen tree, and they've been used for thousands of years, not just as a flavoring, but in traditional health practices across Asia and the Middle East. What makes cloves interesting from a scientific standpoint is a compound called eugenol. It's the primary active component in clove oil, and it's responsible for that strong, slightly numbing, slightly sweet aroma you get when you crack one open. Eugenol has actually been studied fairly extensively, not as a miracle compound, but as a naturally occurring substance with some genuinely interesting properties, particularly around inflammation and oxidative stress, which are two things that become increasingly relevant to overall health as we get older. Here's where the coffee part of this story gets interesting. Coffee itself is one of the richest dietary sources of antioxidants in the average American diet, more so for most people than fruits and vegetables combined, simply because of how much coffee we drink. Antioxidants are compounds that help neutralize something called free radicals, unstable molecules that build up in your body over time and are linked, in research, to the kind of cellular wear and tear associated with aging. When you combine coffee's existing antioxidant content with the eugenol from a clove, some researchers have started exploring whether that pairing creates a kind of layered effect, two different antioxidant pathways working at once, rather than relying on coffee alone. Now, I want to be careful here because this is still an area of ongoing research, and nobody is claiming this combination transforms your health overnight. But the early interest from the nutrition science community is genuinely real, and it's part of why this simple kitchen habit has started gaining attention among people specifically in the 60 and older age range. Let's pause here for a second, because I want to bring in a second story, one that adds a different angle to this. Walter is 68. A retired electrician from outside Pittsburgh, and unlike Dorothy, he didn't stumble onto this by accident. He actually went looking for it. Walter had been dealing with what he described as a heavy feeling after meals for a couple of years. Nothing dramatic, just an uncomfortable fullness that lingered longer than it used to. His doctor had already run the standard tests, nothing alarming showed up, and Walter was told, like so many people his age, that this was likely just part of getting older. Frustrated but not willing to simply accept that as the final answer, Walter started reading about traditional digestive remedies, and clove kept appearing again and again, in older medicinal traditions, often paired with warm beverages. He started adding a single whole clove to his morning coffee, brewing it right alongside the grounds, and within a few weeks he told his wife that he noticed his after-meal heaviness seemed less intense. Not gone, but less intense. Now, I want to be very clear. Walter's experience is one person's anecdote, it's not a clinical study, and his digestive symptoms didn't disappear, they simply seemed, in his own words, more manageable. But his story does point towards something interesting in the traditional use of cloves, specifically around digestion, and that's worth exploring further. So why would clove have any connection to digestion at all? This is where we get into a little bit of the actual physiology. In simple terms, your digestive system relies heavily on smooth, coordinated muscle movement to push food along, and as we age, that coordination, like we've talked about in other videos, can become slightly less efficient. Some traditional health systems have used clove for centuries specifically because of its warming, slightly stimulating aroma and flavor, which some people report helps ease that feeling of sluggish digestion after a meal. Modern research on eugenol has looked at its potential role in supporting healthy digestive function, though I want to be upfront, this research is still considered preliminary in many areas, and clove is not positioned in the scientific literature as a treatment for any digestive condition. What it does appear to be, based on both traditional use and emerging research, is a generally well-tolerated addition to the diet that some people find genuinely helpful as part of their daily routine, which is a very different claim than saying it cures or fixes anything, and I want that distinction to be clear throughout this entire video. Let's bring in a third story now because I think it rounds out the picture nicely. Helen is 74, lives in a small town in North Carolina, and she actually came to this clove habit through her dentist, of all people. During a routine visit, her dentist mentioned that clove oil has long been used in traditional oral care. Even modern dentistry has used eugenol-based products for certain procedures because of its naturally soothing properties. Helen, always curious, asked if there was a simple food-based way to get a small amount of that into her daily routine, and her dentist mentioned, almost as an aside, that some people add a whole clove to their coffee or tea. Helen tried it mostly out of curiosity, expecting nothing in particular, and what she noticed over time wasn't anything dramatic. It was something subtler. She felt like her mouth and throat felt less dry throughout the morning, something she'd been quietly dealing with for a couple of years and had simply accepted as a normal part of aging. Again, this is anecdotal. Dry mouth in older adults has many causes, often related to medications, and clove is absolutely not a substitute for addressing those underlying causes with a doctor or dentist. But Helen's experience does tie back into something we discussed in an earlier video, the relationship between hydration, oral tissue health, and aging, and it's a good reminder that small additions to your routine can sometimes interact with multiple areas of health at once, even in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Now, let's get into the actual science a bit more because I promised you a real explanation, not just stories. Eugenol, the primary compound in cloves, has been the subject of various laboratory studies examining its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. In simple terms, antioxidants help your body manage oxidative stress, which is essentially a kind of cellular wear and tear that accumulates from normal metabolism, environmental exposure, and yes, the natural aging process itself. Chronic low-grade inflammation, something we've discussed extensively in other videos on this channel, has been linked by researchers to a wide range of age-related health concerns, and compounds with anti-inflammatory properties are of genuine interest to nutrition scientists for that reason. Some smaller studies have also looked at eugenol's potential effects on blood sugar regulation, with early research suggesting it may play a role in how the body processes glucose, though I want to stress this research is still in relatively early stages, much of it conducted in laboratory or animal models rather than large-scale human trials, and it would be irresponsible of me to suggest that adding a clove to your coffee meaningfully manages blood sugar on its own. What I can tell you, accurately, is that cloves have one of the highest antioxidant concentrations of any spice when measured by weight, significantly higher than many fruits and vegetables, which is part of why they've drawn interest from researchers studying dietary sources of antioxidants in aging populations specifically. Here's something that I think genuinely surprises people when they hear it for the first time. Cloves have been ranked in certain food antioxidant studies as containing some of the highest levels of antioxidant compounds of any food tested, including well above many berries that get marketed heavily for their antioxidant content. Now, the amount of clove most people would realistically add to a single cup of coffee is small. We're talking about one whole clove, not a tablespoon of ground clove, so the actual quantity of these compounds you're consuming is modest. But even a small, consistent daily addition over weeks and months is the kind of thing nutrition researchers are increasingly interested in, not as a dramatic intervention, but as part of what's sometimes called a food synergy approach. The idea that small, consistent dietary additions layered together over time may contribute to overall wellness in ways that are difficult to measure in a single study, but make intuitive sense when you consider the body holistically. Let's talk about how to actually do this properly, because preparation matters more than people realize. The most common method is incredibly simple. Take one whole clove, not ground clove, whole, and add it directly to your coffee grounds before brewing. Whether you're using a drip machine, a French press, or even a simple pour-over, the whole clove releases its oil slowly and gently as the hot water passes through, giving you a subtle warmth and faint spice note without overwhelming the coffee's natural flavor. Some people prefer to lightly crack the clove first, just gently pressing it with the back of a spoon, which releases slightly more of the eugenol-rich oil. If you're someone who brews coffee by the pot rather than by the cup, 1 to 2 whole cloves for an entire pot is generally the range most people settle on. You really don't need more than that, and in fact, using too much can make your coffee taste overly spiced or even slightly bitter. For people who prefer tea over coffee, the same approach works just as well. Simply steep the whole clove alongside your tea leaves or tea bag for the duration of your steep time. I want to address something here because it's important. A lot of people, once they hear about something like this, tend to think, more must be better, and that's exactly the kind of thinking that can turn a gentle, beneficial addition into something that causes discomfort instead. Cloves, in larger quantities, particularly clove oil in concentrated form, can actually be quite strong, and eugenol in high concentrations has been associated with irritation of the mouth, throat, and digestive tract. This is precisely why we're talking about one whole clove steeped in a pot of coffee, not clove powder stirred directly into a cup. And definitely not clove oil taken directly, which is a much more concentrated substance entirely and isn't something I'd recommend without specific guidance from a healthcare provider. The entire appeal of this particular habit is its gentleness. It's meant to be a subtle, background addition to something you're already doing every day, not a dramatic intervention. Now let's talk safety, because I think this section is just as important as anything else in this video, maybe more important. If you're taking blood-thinning medication, this is something you genuinely need to discuss with your doctor before adding clove regularly to your diet, because some research has suggested that eugenol may have mild effects on blood clotting, and combining that with prescription blood thinners is exactly the kind of interaction that deserves a real conversation with your physician, not a YouTube video. If you have a known sensitivity to clove or to eugenol specifically, which can occur, particularly in people who've had reactions to certain dental products containing eugenol, this probably isn't the right addition for your routine. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, while this video is primarily addressed to viewers over 60, it's still worth noting that concentrated clove products are generally advised against during pregnancy, and any dietary changes during that time should go through your doctor. And broadly speaking, if you're on any regular prescription medication, it's always a good practice to mention any new, even seemingly small dietary additions to your doctor or pharmacist at your next visit. Not because one clove in your coffee is likely to cause a dramatic interaction, but because your healthcare provider knows your full medical picture in a way that no general health video ever could. I say this not to scare you away from trying something simple and traditional, but because I genuinely want you to feel both informed and safe, and those two things go hand in hand. Let's circle back to Dorothy for a moment, because I think her story actually offers a nice, grounded way to think about all of this. Dorothy never went into this expecting some dramatic transformation. She read about it, thought it sounded harmless and interesting, and tried it mostly out of curiosity. What she got, in her own words, wasn't some miraculous change. It was a small pleasant shift in how her mornings felt, paired with a coffee that had a little more depth and warmth to it than before. That's really the honest, realistic way to think about a habit like this. It's not a treatment. It's not a cure. It's not going to replace any medication or medical guidance you're currently following. What it is, based on both traditional use spanning centuries and emerging, though still preliminary, modern research, is a simple, generally well-tolerated addition to a routine that millions of people over 60 already have. Their morning cup of coffee, and for some people, like Dorothy, like Walter, like Helen, it's added a small, genuinely noticeable layer of comfort to something they were already doing anyway. Here's something I think is worth reflecting on as we wrap up this video. So much of what we're told about aging frames it as a long list of things being taken away from us: less energy, less digestive comfort, less of this, less of that. But every once in a while, you come across something refreshingly different, a small, almost ancient tradition, something people have quietly used for centuries that doesn't promise to reverse aging or fix anything dramatically, but simply offers a gentle, thoughtful addition to your day. That's really what this habit represents. It's not about chasing some miracle. It's about being curious, paying attention to your own body the way Dorothy, Walter, and Helen all did in their own ways, and being willing to try small, safe, well-researched additions to your routine, while still keeping your doctor in the loop about anything new you're trying, especially if you're managing other health conditions or medications. So here's what I'd encourage you to do if you're curious and you've talked to your doctor about your specific situation, particularly if you're on blood thinners or have any known sensitivities. Try adding just one whole clove to your coffee or tea tomorrow morning. Pay attention. Not for some dramatic change, but simply to notice how it feels. Maybe you'll notice something subtle, like Dorothy or Helen did. Maybe you won't notice anything at all, and that's okay too. Everyone's body responds differently, and that's exactly why we don't make sweeping promises in videos like this one. What matters most is that you're informed, that you understand both the traditional background and the current state of the actual science, and that you're making thoughtful, safe choices about your own health, one small habit at a time. If this video gave you something new to think about today, I'd really appreciate it. If you hit that like button, it genuinely helps this kind of careful, balanced health content reach more people in your age group who are looking for real information instead of empty promises. And if you've ever tried something like this yourself, clove in your coffee or any other small traditional habit passed down through your family, I'd love for you to share it in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. Don't forget to subscribe, because we're going to keep exploring these kinds of thoughtful, grounded health topics together. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.